Well, here we are.
Where are we?
Oh, that's the whole thing. In in show business, it's good to know where you are.
You don't always, but you bluff it, you fake
You
it.
know, we're so grateful for you sharing this for the present and future students at Emerson College.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Well, I'll start off.
Jenny gonna get the ball
yes?
rolling.
Let them know we're rolling. They're not aware, so let me just.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Didn't we just ask? Yeah, okay. Is he going to let us know when they're aware? Yeah. Let's wait for him to come back in. Well, I really enjoyed your biography, and both of them. And I was really interested to learn that you grew up in this area in Los Angeles, and I know that the theater bug, the performance bug, caught you early, but I was interested to learn that you originally were interested to be an opera singer.
Oh yes, that was right after my forest ranger period. First I wanted to be a forest ranger, and back in those days, girls couldn't be forest rangers. They just didn't fit the bill, and but I always loved to sing. But I studied very seriously. I can sing Un bel dì from Madame Butterfly all in Italian. I won't now because you probably don't have time. Vici d'arte from Tosca. Oh, I wanted to be an opera singer.
Oh, I just am curious from that. When did you realize that you were funny and had an ability to go into comedy?
I don't think you ever realize you're funny. I think it either hits you in here or not. But I was an only child with the best mother and father. If I've done anything right in my life, I picked the right mother and father. And we'd have breakfast or dinner or something like that. And nobody played it straight in our family. Everybody would play off of something else. We'd be in serious discussions and something would trigger and somebody'd have to make a play on words or something. So you kind of grew up with it. And I like laughing a lot better than crying, so comedy was much more fun than drama.
And not having been schooled formally in theater, and there's no school of comedy, but a lot of your early experience on radio, and then in the first days of television, I mean, you were really there at the beginning of television.
My husband, Alan Ludden, used to say I was a pioneer in silent television.
Pioneer is a person with arrows sticking out of his
I
tushy.
can't, you're going to have to speak up a little bit, guys. I can't hear you.
When I tell you, you'll know that it wasn't worth repeating. I said a pioneer is a guy with arrows sticking out of his ass.
That's right. Or her, as the case may be, gender-oriented.
Right.
Can you talk a bit about your first, one of your first experiences with Al Jarvis on Hollywood on Television, and how that maybe prepared you for the spontaneous moments?
Al Jarvis was a disc jockey in Los Angeles, and I had done a couple of just one-shot guest shots to sing a song or something at KLAC. This is back when television was just starting. It was anybody who would stand still in front of a camera was on television. But Al did one of these long 5.5-hour radio shows where he'd play records and do. So he thought, well, why couldn't that be on television? We might as well. So he put a camera in front of it and started playing records. Well, he called me one day and he said, I need a Girl Friday, to somebody to play off of or whatever. And so I thought I was coming in I had 1/2 hour job at that time for which I was paid $5. And that was more money than I had ever made in my life. So I thought another half hour, that'll be $10 that I get. Well, it turned out he was going to do his 5.5-hour show on television, playing the records. Well, nobody wanted to hear the records. They wanted to hear what we were saying to each other. So the second week of the show, they just put the records away and we just kind of ad-libbed it. And then when the guests would come through, it was like going to television college. you had to think on your feet because there was no script to refer to, and you had to keep your mental editor shined up a lot because whatever came out, whatever came in here came out, so you had to be very careful of that. But it was magnificent training for 4.5 years.
Was that, how many other live shows were going on at that time in LA?
There was just KTLA and KLAC. We were on KLAC, and KTLA had a certain group of shows, but we sort of broke the ground on daytime because who's going to watch television in the daytime? Whoever watches television in the daytime, of course. Well, people would, and they'd hang in there for 5.5 hours a day, 6 days a week. We were on Monday through Saturday. And not just my mother, but other people did the same thing.
I think it would be interesting for students to learn how you were able to then get your own show from that, and how also, I know that lots of interviewers have asked you about being a woman in this industry in the early days, and but you had your own production company with Lou Feddersen and George Tibbets, right? And if you could talk about how you were able to take control very early on of what projects you were doing.
Well, Al Jarvis was sort of a television-aholic, and 5.5 hours a day wasn't quite enough for him, so he started an evening show as well. So we would do 5.5 hours a day and then an hour once a week in the evening, and it was sort of a talent show, and whoever won the talent competition got to appear on next week's daytime show. But I also sang like 2 songs sometime during that hour, and a friend of ours, or my lifelong friend now, but at that point a friend of Al's, would write a little sketch into a popular song of the day, and the payoff, the joke line, would be the song title, and then I'd go into the song. So we'd play husband and wife, Alvin and Elizabeth, and then I'd go into the song. Well, finally, the station manager called us in and said, forget the rest of the show. Could you do a husband and wife show like that for a half hour? And in my wisdom, I said, well, the reason it's funny, it's just they're little short skits, like you would tell an anecdote in an evening if people are over visiting. A funny thing happened to Alan and me last night, but it would never hold up for a half hour. Was I smart? What possible half-hour comedy? Don't be silly. It just never worked. But that's how Life with Elizabeth, my first series, evolved from that. So it came from the daytime show to the night show with Al, and then into Life with Elizabeth.
And then how did you come to form a partnership with, was it Lou and George?
The station manager, Don Feddersen, and George Tibbets and I had our own little production company, and it was one of our slate of writers, our staff of writers were George Tibbets, and George would pick me up to go to the studio, and we'd sort of ad-lib what we were going to do. He'd have gotten it down on paper what we were going to do for this show, but for next week's show we would ad-lib something that happened to us, and so we didn't have a lot of going talent in it. But Don Feddersen was a great and dear friend. He also started at the same time Liberace and Johnny Carson and me. The 3 of us were his children, and we're very grateful to him.
Can you talk a bit about the sensibilities of the day? Unfortunately, I haven't seen any Life with Elizabeth. I hope to someday. But it sounds like the character is something I can imagine, where you were this very sweet, all-American girl, but you had a lot of double entendre that you would slip in, and.
But she was dizzy. Elizabeth was the dizzy wife. She was not the. She was just about this much smarter than Alvin, her husband. He was let's face it, nothing had been around at that time, so we were plowing new ground. And it was great fun because we could play all the jokes and then do a double entendre if it came in there without offending anybody or anything. It was just in the course of conversation. And for the people who got it, they'd think it was funny. And the other people, it would go over their heads, so no harm, no foul. But now, after all these years, television has changed to the point, I don't think television has changed so much as the audience has changed. They've seen it all. They've heard it all. They know all the jokes. They know all the gambits. They know all the... That's why they're having to reach so hard to put formats together about, well, let's see, we'll have a bunch of morticians, and then we'll have a little... Over here we have guys who have an orgy, whatever. But at that point, the audience was absolutely virginal. They heard radio shows, but they didn't see these people that they invited into their home. You came into their den to visit with them and do your comedy in there. That was new and very exciting.
I'm trying to think if there was a peer group of women active at that time, in whether it was in comedy or not.
Well, Lucy, she was doing, we had about $1.95 to build our sets, and that was it. And I think they spent something like $200 a week for theirs. So that was the difference between Lucy and our show. But Elizabeth, my favorite husband, wasn't that Elizabeth Montgomery?
Yeah.
Elizabeth Montgomery, and there weren't a lot of women around. There weren't a lot of regular shows around. That was just beginning to happen.
There was a real sense of survival, because my sense of you and others has always been that you were accepted as an equal sort of instantly, or did it happen because it was such a male-dominated medium?
Well, it was, at that point, we didn't think gender-wise like we do today, that the men and the women, it was just, you were lucky if you were working with these people. So the people that I worked with a lot were men. And it gave a little, opened a door for maybe a different audience. But we didn't think in those terms. We just thought of, let's build the audience, not how many women are watching or how many men are watching.
When you were developing this character, Elizabeth, what was she based on?
She was based on, they were newlyweds. And no, that was Date with the Angels. They were newlyweds. They were just a married couple for Life with Elizabeth. And just anecdotal stuff that happened in George's life or in my life. And I wasn't even married at the time, so it was more anecdotes, but what happened with them. Simple little things that happen every day. If somebody comes in, I remember Frank Sinatra Jr. stopped me one time on the street. I'd never met him. He said, "I loved the show about the lobster. Oh, the lobster was just wonderful." Well, it seemed that Elizabeth was going to cook this fancy dinner for Alvin, and she was going to serve him lobster. Well, she bought a lobster, but she didn't realize that it was alive. And she could no more put it into boiling water than she could fly to the moon, so she had her pet lobster over in the kitchen. Well, then we did the whole show around her pet lobster, and we never did eat the lobster.
One of the things in your book that was about the Sue Ann Nivens character and how it came to you, that role, that you later found out that when they had written the part, that they actually described it as a Betty White type.
Sue Ann Nivens was wherever we'd go during the Mary Tyler Moore show, we'd go someplace to promote the show. We'd go to a small town and they'd have a radio station or a television station, and somebody would invariably say, "Oh, have we got one of those?" Yeah, we've got. She was this witchy, icky, sickeningly sweet person who was your neighborhood nymphomaniac at the same time. And she thought she was the creme de la creme that had ever happened in life. And she was the only one who thought so, but she didn't realize that. But her whole, it was, again, it goes right back down. We get all the credit because our faces show on television. But we couldn't do it if it's not on that page. It's the writers who are the heroes. And for shows that last and for shows that hold up over long periods of time, it's because of that writing. And I've been so blessed with Mary Tyler Moore and with Golden Girls, and now with Boston Legal with David E. Kelley. If it weren't on the page, we would very soon run out of our little tricks and our little, you go through your own little bag of tricks very quickly.
It was such a great family. I'm sitting here thinking about how you've been part of these royal families of this.
Oh, and where you can't wait until Monday morning to see the new script, because we would read, they wouldn't send us the script ahead of time. We'd go in and do a table read cold on just to see, well, we couldn't wait to get those scripts to see what would happen. And we'd all crack up and get that all out of our systems and then proceed to get our nose to the grindstone and make it happen. But it's so exciting when you, and you don't necessarily, or I'm speaking personally, I suppose somebody else might build a character some other way, but it's what happens that what you get off that page that builds the character. You think, oh, I didn't know she'd do that. Well, she would. I bet she would also do, and you build it that way, where you don't bring it out of whole cloth somewhere off some starry cloud and say, oh, there's a wonderful character, I'll do that.
MTM, was it done always in front of a live audience?
Yes, yes. And with 3 cameras. And it's such fun to do it that way because you get so much feedback from, now Life with Elizabeth wasn't, we filmed it. And then we would show the film to an audience to get the laugh track after they saw. Well, that was before the Mary Tyler, long before the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And the heartbreaking part was, in doing the show, we never waited for laughs, so the audience would laugh and they'd miss the next 2 lines, and it was very technologically very crude back in those days. Where by the time we got to the Mary Tyler Moore Show and doing it in front of the live audience was so exciting because you'd find yourself starting into the next line, but you just automatically, you'd hear that little giggle start and you'd stop, so the rhythm changed. Comedy's all about rhythm anyway, and it certainly made it more fun. And then in between the scenes, when you're walking back and forth, you can kid with the audience and make jokes back and forth with the audience, and pretty soon after about the first scene, they become great and dear friends, and they're in on something. They can go home and turn the set on and watch the show, but that way they feel they're kind of part of it.
Mary Tyler Moore, I remember observing the fact there were so many people in that cast and everyone kept that character consistent.
Oh, and what I was so impressed for, when they first called me to do the show, it seemed they had been trying to cast this character that they had written, and they wrote it for a sickeningly sweet television, a Betty White type, on television. And so Ethel Wynand, who was the casting director, said, well, why don't you get Betty? Oh, we can't get Betty, because Betty and Mary and Alan and Grant Tinker, her husband at the time, they're great and dear friends. We can't do that, because then if Betty doesn't get the part, it might make it awkward for Mary and all that. So they went on looking. Well, they couldn't find anybody sickeningly sweet enough. So Ethel said, it's a one-shot. Why don't you just give it to Betty? I'm sure it'll be all right. It won't bother Mary or anything like that. So they called me one Saturday and said, would you do the show next week? Well, I was delighted. I thought it'd be great fun. And so it just came accidentally like that. And the exciting part was that night, At the end of the show, Alan Burns, one of the creators, came to me and said, "We've got another idea for a script." And 2 weeks later, I was back on the show. So I was a recurring role. I wasn't a regular, but Sue Ann became a great and dear friend of mine. I loved her, rotten as she was.
Ted Knight, all of them, just absolute gem performances. Just going down Merriment Lane, thinking about the faces, and especially what America remembers most is the rap show, when everybody hugged everybody and.
Oh, when the last Mary Tyler Moore show, that was a painful week. That Mary decided the network didn't decide to stop the show. Mary wanted to do a musical. She wanted to dance. That was her passion. So she decided this will be the last year of the show. So when we first came back after the summer break, she said, "Do you realize this is the first show of the last year?" And it was sort of that kind of a season, all season long. Well, by the time we got to the last week, we would pass each other in the hall and clutch each other. So by the time we got to the last day, the last script, well, we didn't ever see the last scene until the Friday morning that we were going to shoot it, because the writers just couldn't put it down on paper. And so we played it around and we rehearsed up to the point. Finally, we got the script. Well, everybody was a mess. And it was just Mary going out the door and just taking a backward look and closing the door. Well, we got through it. But about 3 weeks later, Mary decided to give a rap party for just the people on the production staff and that kind of thing. No outsiders or press or anything. So she gave a television dinner at Chasen's with a set by all the tables so we could see it. Well, we had all been so emotionally involved, we really didn't know what the show was like. And so here we all are laughing at the show, realizing it was a very funny show. And then it came up to the point where Lou Grant, Ed Asner, turned and said, "I treasure you people." Well, in Chasen's that night, you heard this one chorus sob, and we were gone again. And I still, to this day, cannot watch that. You see reruns, I can't watch that last scene without it overflows.
It transferred that emotion to the entire audience. I mean, that was a moment that we all.
And it's so exciting when that kind of rapport can happen between, and let's face it, as technical as television is, you don't expect that emotion. But I think more even than the big screen, because we're in your house. You've invited us into your house, and we all share this. And what I love about television, you're never playing to more than 3 or 4 people at a time. If there are more than 3 or 4 people in a room, they're talking to each other. They're not listening to you. So it really is an intimate conversation. In a movie, you're playing that scene for a whole house full of people. I guess I'm a television child. I love it.
You've written a lot about how you've enjoyed being in the business of laughter, and that show, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and many of the shows you've been on have addressed issues that were tough, but because they were handled through the lens of humor, like there was a Mary Tyler Moore episode, Chuckles the Clown dies, and I mean, the way it's handled, it's something everyone could relate to, and I think that's what a lot of your shows have.
Chuckles the Clown turned out to be a real classic. He, oddly enough, Jay Sandrich, who directed most of the Mary Tyler Moore shows, didn't want to direct that. So he had somebody else direct that show. He said, "I don't see anything funny about death, and I don't see where we can do." Well, it turned out that Mary, throughout the show, felt the same way, because we were all. Chuckles played the clown, but he was in this parade, and he was dressed as a peanut, and he got peeled by an elephant. And so that was his demise. And we all finally found a little funny side of that, and Mary was absolutely shocked that we would find anything funny. Well, then we get to the funeral, and all of a sudden, in one of those forbidden places where you don't dare laugh, something hit Mary funny. And we're all very much into the funeral, and she's back there giggling and trying not to. And the guy gets up, he's doing the eulogy, and he said, "I'll never forget, Chuckles, a little song, a little dance, a little seltzer down your pants." Well, that just cracked her up. And we are all so shocked, and everybody is just looking at her, and it was a beautiful juxtaposition of two attitudes. So it turned out to be, every time that there's a vote about, in all of 7 years and stuff, what was the best show, it came out Chuckles the Clown.
It is symbolic of using humor as survival in the life. Just
in real life, that's the only way you get through some things. I learned that at the breakfast table when my mom and dad and I were sitting around, that you can't let yourself sink into something so deeply that you lose touch with what's going around you. No matter what kind of trouble you think you're in, somebody else is in worse trouble, and they just kind of planted that in the back of your head. And the only saving grace sometimes is to just, a little part of your brain plays the funny side of something, or there's a play on words, or you hear, I love puns. People say they groan at puns. I think a lot of people groan at puns because they don't get them. They don't get the double meaning of a word, and by double meaning, I don't mean anything salacious. I mean just a word can mean two things, and you apply it in a different direction, and it cracks me up. I think it's hilariously funny. So I guess I was raised on that, and it's saved my bacon on many an occasion for my own self.
That the reference, the pun is the lowest form of humor, when actually it's the highest. Wordplay is the highest form.
I think that, and you think it's the highest form of the wordplay. I think it's the highest form because it keeps you listening. And it keeps you, when you do hear a word or you play off of it. And also, there are people who play off of it and drop it and move on. For the people who don't get it, who cares? I mean, they're not hurt by it. And for a couple of people who did hear it, they get a kick out of it. Where some people who think they're doing comedy, it's one of those, hey, or even in real life, hey, did you hear what I said? Did you get it? Hey, did you get it? Wasn't that funny? Oh, those people turn me off a lot.
Do you think that just talking more about the importance of comedy and laughter and looking at a situation through lighter eyes, could you talk a little bit about the importance humor has had in your own life?
Well, it certainly kept, I love to laugh. I really love to laugh. And I think it beats the daylights out of the alternative. I really do. But I kid with my dogs, or you'll hear something on television. I'll watch David Letterman at night or something, and he says something, but you find yourself answering him back, and it just keeps life more interesting. Of course, it could be the first signs of insanity, too. I realize that. But I think if you start, I don't mean little Pollyanna, look at the bright side, always look for the upside. But I think if you get into the habit of being able to see the upside, some people wake up in the morning, now what's going to be wrong today? Or how are you? Well, I have this or I have that. They think of the downside first, or the critical side, where if something hits you funny, you're not trying to be funny for somebody else's benefit. You're being funny for your own benefit. You're just enjoying the humor that happens every hour of every day that we live. And it helps you over the rough spots because it isn't all humor, as we know.
We've talked a little bit about the healing power of laughter and play and the positive attitude. I had personal privilege of working with Norman Cousins, and
Well, he said there was actually a physiological benefit to laughter. And I mean, there's been a lot of studies on that. I don't know anything, intellectually about it, but I know I've been blessed with good health all my life, and I feel wonderful. And I haven't spent a lot of time concentrating on this is wrong or that's wrong. I think it does. And when my husband was so ill, and it was a long, long period of his being ill, you would see the good days and how it would give him a lift to be laughing at something. And I'm a firm believer that laughter is a beneficial thing, but I don't know how physiological that is as opposed to emotional. I don't know.
at UCLA, Norman Cousins got a grant from Mrs. Kroc for a couple of $1 million to prove the hard wiring between attitude, laughter, and healing. And
Really, a grant to invest. What
And
was discovered?
it was discovered that it does exist, that there is a connection. They were using the term hard wiring, whatever that means, but that there is a physiological connection between laughter, lightheartedness, and healing and health.
And it isn't always, laughter isn't all, sense of humor isn't always lightheartedness. Many times it's a wall of defense against downheartedness. It's your seawall that you keep the tide from coming in and washing over you by building that seawall of trying to keep your sense of humor going. And I'm a firm believer and I'm an advocate of humor, as you can tell from what I say. It just makes you feel better, I think.
It also, a show like The Golden Girls also served as a kind of reflective mirror. It was funny for another reason, not just to, deal with something that was tragic or sad, but it was, it made it okay to laugh at a group of women that, had never been seen on television, hadn't given a voice before.
And the four old broads together, living together. Golden Girls was, I think, a big surprise to the network. I think the network was putting on this show about four older women to address an audience, a strata of the audience that had not been addressed before. You didn't see many old people on shows unless they came across with an outrageous line and then disappeared or that. But as far as carrying a show where you had to invite them in every week, it hadn't been done. And I think what shocked the network, it shocked all of us, it was the kids picked up on it. The kids, 75% of our mail was from people under 25. And to this day, with all the endless reruns all over the world, we're in 48 countries, and we get mail from Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and Paris and Finland. And you think, what do those people see in these four older women? But the mail is all from young, and we're a college cult now. They have evenings, Golden Girls evenings, and it's fascinating. You try to find all kinds of reasons for it, but I think some of it had to do with great big Bea Arthur being bossed around by her mother, who was this big, and they loved to see that relationship and that put down. But it was a wonderful surprise to everybody. I don't think any of us expected it.
And the license to be overtly horny at the Blanche character, Rue McClanahan.
When Golden Girls was first being presented, first of all, we were sent these scripts. and it was the best script. You get a lot of bad scripts, you know that, Bill. But it was the best script any of us had seen for who knows, if ever. And they had written Blanche for me, and of course B for Dorothy, and they were looking for Rose for the Blanche character. I mean the Rose character. So they had Rue McClanahan come in and read for that. Well, they saw her and she came in and they said, just while you're sitting there, why don't you just read Blanche just for fun? Well, she was wonderful, and Jay Sandridge, again, who had directed most of the Mary Tyler Moore shows, was directing the pilot, and he said, look, let's find somebody else to play Blanche. Let's make Betty be Rose, because Blanche is so close to Sue Ann Nivens as far as the neighborhood nymphomaniac that it'll look to the audience, no matter how many stops Betty tries to pull out, it'll look like she's playing the same character. Well, Rue took Blanche into a strata that I would never have had the guts to take her to. And she just made the character her own, and she would crack us up on the stage. And she played it by believing that she was that character. She was the most glamorous, the sexiest, and Rue did like her fellas. She liked her fellas a lot. But she got all that out into Blanche that, oh, it was fun to watch it grow. And I had no idea who Rose was. Rose was somebody that I had never played before. And again, bless Jay's heart, he said, Rose is not dumb. She's just terminally naive. And she takes every word for its surface meaning. And never any sarcasm, never any double meaning, any ploy, any pun, anything like that. Every word meant just what the word said. If you said, I could eat a horse, she'd call the SPCA, and it was that honest a character. So it was new for me to play that, and it was such fun that, oh, Rue and I had a wonderful time doing it. And she would come in with these outrageous things. But her complaint on the show, Rue's complaint, was that Rose got more action than Blanche did, because Rose, in her innocent, straightforward way, she had a man die in her bedroom, but she was just going straight forward, going through life as it was.
What do you think about Rose made her so comical? Because you played it for her very straight, but it was, I think, the surprise that she did something unexpected that got the laughs.
Yes, I think they would play against her type. First of all, Rose, as Scandinavian as she was, and they'd give her these impossible names to master, but she was very innocent. But she had a Viking temper. When something displeased her, she'd go bananas. But then she would start talking about her husband and their wonderful relationship, and how a couple of times she did worry because they would maybe go 2 days without sex, and that she thought maybe something was happening to their relationship. Well, Blanche would say, "You did what?" And in her innocence, I think she was busier, much busier than Blanche. It was fun.
I wanted to just go back. You mentioned before that every actor, every comic has their own bag of tricks. Could you go into that a little? Bill and I were talking about how you can't teach someone how to be funny, but there are certain tools you could give them.
I think everybody has their own reactions that they do, but they're so you don't know what they are. But without good writing and without good direction, you tend to react in the same way too often until it becomes a little predictable and a little dull. But all of humor, now I sound like I'm pontificating, and I don't mean to, but humor is such a rhythm thing. The writers spend hours laboring over a sentence to get the beats, to get the a line will come out. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get on the other side. You can't say there was this chicken and he was walking down the street and he decided to cross over. I wonder why he did that. Well, maybe he saw something on the other side. You know, there's no laugh in there. And guest stars would come on, either Mary or Golden Girls, and they'd start to paraphrase the writing that was there. And the director would say, no, read it as written. Well, no, I did. It just comes, it's more comfortable this way. It sounds more like me this way and stuff. Well, they'd kill all the beats. They would put an extra couple of syllables in there and literally kill the laugh. You've got to be open to, it's like hearing the beat in music. You feel it more than hear it. You just feel it. I know that sounds vague and silly, but it's, you know that, Bill. You know,
Yeah,
you've
I
lived that all
observed
your
about
life.
The writing on the Golden Girls, often writers will hire somebody they know has either comic ability to ad lib or is a comedy writer plus being a performer, so that they'll get something additional. On the Golden Girls, I was told right up front, read what's on the page.
And make
I
it work.
did, and it was...
And make it work for you, but don't you add a lot of other stuff that you think will make it work better. It's there, just find your comfortable interpretation.
When I was doing Uncle Angelo, I found that it was the first time that I had that experience. What was on the page was meant for the stage, and it worked.
Well, it doesn't come lightly. Those guys would stay up all night polishing and honing. Well, why doesn't that work? That's what I love doing the Mary Tyler Moore Show. When I first did it, I was so impressed by the fact that even if people weren't in the scene, if Ed wasn't in the scene, or Gavin, or Ted Baxter, or if nobody would go back to their dressing room or anything like that. They'd all be pacing backstage and listening to how the rest of the show was working. Why didn't that get a laugh? What went wrong? Well, I think he took too long to do this, or I think they dropped a word out, or I don't know. Why didn't that work? Because it's funny, it should have. They were backstage just as much working for the show as they were if they were on camera. I found that exciting. I found that fun, and one of the secret ingredients of a successful show.
The experience you're going through now on Boston Legal shot like a moon picture.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole, obviously you're not going for, it's not a comedy show, but it's a totally different experience.
It's a totally different experience, and that's why when we did Life with Elizabeth on film, you do the take, the master shot. You do the whole show and you get your laughs and your beats. But then you go back and then you do a two-shot and then you do a close-up. And by the time you get through with all those, you learn to try to keep it the illusion of the first time. But at first, you're beating that poor joke to death till you've taken every ounce of life out of that joke. And that's why I love the live feeling of the 3-camera or 4-camera comedy shows where you go through the whole thing and you do it like a play, like a live play. But Boston Legal is on film, so you go over and over again, and much of it is spent waiting while they move the camera and do the reverse angles and all that. And I think that's easier with drama than it is with comedy. Because with comedy, you've got to come in with that first blush, where with drama, each time you go through it, you maybe do it a little better, or you work it over. But comedy doesn't work like that. The freshness wears off kind of soon.
I wonder if there's any advice or something you could speak to about your early days on television. A lot of game shows. You did Match Game and a lot of Password, and you were a favorite on a lot of these shows because of your spontaneous ability to keep up. And I wonder if there was a special skill or something that you had, maybe it's a confidence or a trust with the audience, or what do you think it was that enabled you to just go out there and be funny?
But you don't know you're being funny. That's the thing. You're reacting, but you're not, oh, I'm going to react and be funny. It just, if it hits you funny, you'll say it. Game shows are a wonderful, or were a wonderful way of, it's the best training in the world. You have to think on your feet. And you're so busy playing the game, you can't be conscious of how you are on camera, how do I look, how am I coming across. You're busy playing the game, and you're in there with both feet. It's wonderful training. The problem with game shows now, even what used to be wonderful game shows, like Hollywood Squares was wonderful because they'd ask a question and they'd pop out with whatever came in. Now it's all pre-written, and you're given the jokes ahead of time, and you're asked, you stay with those jokes, don't try to, and it takes all the spontaneity out of it. Probably better for the audience, I don't know, but it sure takes the walking on the edge of the cliff feeling away, where you had to really be careful, because the first thing that would enter your head and pop up might be inappropriate. You know, if you have a body sense of humor, you have to kind of watch that a little bit. But it still keeps you on your toes instead of, well, now I'm gonna say this, and if I read it this way, it may get the laugh. I think you lose some of the spontaneity.
There's a point of interest for the student of whether you're going to be a writer or a performer in the whole area of the business of show business, the representation, or how that can support or sometimes destroy.
The what of
the representation, your agents, your managers, and
oh,
so
all
forth.
the people between you and yeah. I've always been lucky. I've had one agent at a time. I've had, over the years, I've had, well, I guess 3. That's been it. But I don't have an entourage. I don't have a manager, and I don't have this, and a lot of performers do, and then there's usually a spouse mixed in there too with their opinions, either a husband or a wife who could be, and it can clutter up the territory a lot before you get into the actual performance and conversely, the production has a lot more people now than they used to have. It used to be you were dealing directly with the writers or the director, where sometimes you don't ever see the writers. They're off in a room, and the director has a couple of assistants, and so it's just a much bigger. It's a city as opposed to a very small town now, which a lot of advantages undoubtedly come from that, and better production and better technological things. But when too many people get into the pot, it diffuses the thing you're trying to cook. Particularly in humor, I think, because everybody's sense of humor isn't the same. So if too many people get in on advising, the humor sort of goes out the window and it becomes an amalgam.
Well, the relationships you've had with your animal family, which of the animals had the best sense of humor?
Sense of humor, I started to say my golden retriever, but he's just one big throbbing heart. I mean, he'll think it's funny if Mother says, I think I broke my leg. Oh, bless you, Mommy, did you? That's fine. That's whatever. Well, that's great. I think it's my little Shih Tzu. Now, of my present animals, but through the years, I've always found Pekingeses. The Pekingeses just knock me out because they're one jump ahead of you, these big globy eyes, always have a twinkle in them. And my Bandy I had for 15 years. And I would talk to Bandy like I'm talking to you guys. And all of a sudden, I'd see that twinkle, and I'd say, now what are you doing? Now what do you mean by that? And the tail would start rolling, then he'd start one of these things. I think Pekingeses. I think my Bandit was the best sense of humor.
I'd like to talk more about your love of animals and how you've been very lucky to marry your love of performing with your love of animals. You had a show, Pet Love, and I think that it would be interesting to the students watching this that you can keep the bigger picture in mind, that it's not just about what you do every day, but you can use your voice, and you have lent your name and your image to help causes that you believe in. Could you speak about that a little?
I am the luckiest old woman on 2 feet in that my life is divided absolutely in half. Half animals, half show business, the two things that I love above and beyond anything else. And the animals, of course, have always come first because that came from the womb. My mother and dad were, if anything, worse than I am. So that was an adjunct all the way along, and the show business sort of came in. But I don't know what it is not only be with animals, but be working for animals. And back when I first started with Don Feddersen, back Life with Elizabeth, I tried to sell him on a show, Bandit and Me. I was even pitching back at that point. But it's just kept, and they're so different in a way. I've been with the Morris Animal Foundation for 37 years. We're headquartered in Denver. It's a health organization. We fund humane studies into specific health problems of dogs, cats, horses, and zoo and wildlife. And I make 6 trips to Denver a year for executive committee meetings and everything, but it's a very technical, scientific organization. And it turns your head in that direction, but then the show business thing leaks over because of the, quote, celebrity thing that goes along. People will, what is Morris Animal Foundation? If the celebrity says, they'll find out where you can't get anybody to listen to that except the scientific community. So it's a way of blending the two. But I would be lost without my animal orientation and without the things that I've learned over the years. After I wanted to be a forest ranger and didn't do that, and I really wanted to be a zookeeper. Well, I am a zookeeper. I've been with the Los Angeles Zoo for over 30 years, and I'm a zoo commissioner now. But zoos all over the country, I'm able to go and get a backstage tour and get and any contact animals holding baby gorillas or whatever. It's a privilege that goes along with paying your dues in the animal world, but also with the celebrity. You don't get that kind of privilege unless the celebrity factor comes in. I realize it, I know it, and if I didn't love animals so much, I would say, well, no, I don't want to take advantage, but I love them so much. Any excuse I can get to get my hands on things, I'll use.
I wonder if you could also talk about, you've had such a long and varied career, and you're on Boston Legal now, and you've been in this business for how many decades now?
57 years.
And counting. What do you attribute the longevity and your staying power to?
Oh, sheer blind luck for one thing, but I, again, can't believe that they'll catch on to me one of these days. They haven't yet, and I'm not going to help them. But I hear people say, oh, but there are no roles for women anymore. They just, once you pass a given age, nobody wants you. Yes, they do, but you've got to take what comes by. You can't say, well, I'm waiting. I know I don't want to play mothers. No, I don't want to do this. No, you take the role that comes by, and sometimes it isn't if it's one you really hate, then avoid it. But if it's not one that you're thrilled with, or you think it's too small a role, or you think for some reason or other it's not your cup of tea, do it anyway, because it's a growth situation. You may never want to do that again, but at least you tried it, and it kept you alive in the minds of not only the audience but the people who are doing the casting. But that's why then all of a sudden you get blessed by being invited into a show on a recurring basis like Boston Legal. I still am in shock. I'm thrilled. And again, I say, don't tell anybody that I'm doing it, because they'll say, what? Did we hire her?
When we were talking about people to interview, I came up with the suggestion that we should talk to Bill Shatner. They said, "Whoa, wait a minute! He's a sci-fi guy." Or I said, "You have to, if you want to see really good comedy, watch him in action on Boston Legal."
William Shatner is one of the most brilliant actors that you could possibly ask, and also one of the brightest minds off camera. And I was a big Trekkie. I loved Star Trek. Captain Kirk was my hero. But the Boston Legal Bill Shatner is somebody altogether different, and he's playing such a complex role. He's playing this egotistical, wonderful lawyer, one of the partners in the company, but who's losing it just a little bit. And everybody knows it, and it's like a blowing curtain. Sometimes he loses it at the wrong times in a trial or something, but then they get right back off of that, and he gets right back off. But less and less, the other people on the characters on the show, not the people, but the characters on the show are beginning to not trust his character that much. They know that he's in a little bit of trouble. Well, it makes a wonderful ongoing week in and week out thing, because sometimes he's brilliant and he's right on top of it, as in real life it can happen. But then every once in a while you see this little shadow come in that it's something bad's happening in there. That's when writing gets exciting. That's when all of a sudden you see somebody be able to put that on the page, and then Bill execute it. It's just wonderful.
Unfortunately, you've shared that experience in real life with Estelle Getty on the Golden Girls. When I was doing it, there were some indications of this. There's nothing really funny about that, except it does point to the survival aspect of a cast so strongly connected.
When Estelle Getty would have trouble remembering lines, it was a thing that she just would blank out sometimes, and it wasn't a case she didn't work at it, but it was frustrating because she finally got to the point where she would write her lines we'd sit around the kitchen table, and the salt and pepper shakers and the creamer all had little lines written on them. We didn't realize at that point what a serious ongoing problem was beginning to rear its ugly head. It was just a frustration, and we thought she wasn't applying herself or something like that, but she couldn't help it, and it's just gotten a little steadily worse, bless her dear heart, and she's such a darling.
We certainly
I think you know more about me now than I know, or anybody wants to know. I can't imagine. I've gone on and my answers get so long and wordy, but I just
got to those answers.
I think out loud. That's all I can do, and it continue. I hear this voice going on. I think, who is that? It's you. Okay, sorry.
Well, I know we're winding down. I wonder if there's any lessons that you wish you had known at the beginning of your career that you could share now with people going into the business?
Oh, it sounds so self-serving if you say not really, because each thing is a learning experience, and each thing you don't realize how much that helped you. What happened here helped you later on, but at the time you don't know. And I think it's just an amalgam of what you do that builds the core of, you mentioned the word confidence before. I think it gives you a little more security to go for something that you wouldn't have the guts to go for when you're first starting out. And I think it gives you the feeling, well, they're not going to be mad at me if I try this and it doesn't work. Where when you're first starting out, you think, if I try this and it doesn't work, there goes my career, it's over. It would help if you could start out knowing that. But if you started out knowing that, you wouldn't get the buildup of the things you learn as you go along. I'm just glad it's happened. I'm still learning. And I will continue to learn until about 6 months after they bury me, and then I'm going to cut out.
I'm going to stop at that time. We've had a STET question. Was it worth it?
Was it worth it? Was it worth it? I mean, I'm the happiest person. I'm happier now than I've ever been, and that's hard to say with all the wonderful stuff that's happened in my life. But being in show business is like being in a very small town, and no matter the older you get and the more the years that pile up, I walk on a set now, and somebody up in the rafters says, "Hey, Betty, hi, nice to see you again. We worked together on such and such." And you walk into the market, and strangers come up to you and say, "Oh, Betty, hi, how are you?" Or when I was doing Golden Girls, little kids this big would come and they'd tug on your shirt and say, "Woes, it's Woes." They couldn't say Rose, but it was Woes. Yes, it was worth it. Oh my goodness, yes. And I don't know how I lucked in, but boy, I'm tasting every minute. And that's one thing I would like to say. Don't look back on something and say, "Gee, wasn't that great? I didn't realize it at the time." Realize it as you go along. Taste it for what it is now. Do it. Even if it's something you don't like doing. All right, I'm experiencing this and I can't wait till it's over, but let's get through it and get on to something better. But don't just take it for granted and then look back on it. Look at it now.
With a be here now sense, a mutual sense here of gratitude, we applaud you. This was beautiful, Betty. Really.
Well, and I'm sorry I've gone on so long, but it's your fault.
Well, we'd keep you here all night if we could.
Yeah. Thanks so much, darling.
Thank you, darling.
It's a good sentiment for life, in general, what you have to say, for anyone, not just showbiz people, but.
Oh, I think I just said it. Just taste it now and make the most of every man, and don't feel put upon about things. If you really look at things, we all blame somebody or something else, but don't be too quick to blame somebody else, because usually if you really look at it, you find you screwed up somewhere. Somewhere in there it happened because you screwed up. So be aware of that too. And don't believe your own publicity. Don't take yourself too seriously.